military.
So perhaps I'll agree with the language or the wording of paragraph 1 again. It's about order, peace and order, maintain its administration. So you seem to be saying that the measure was not necessary. But the actual language is any conduct by Russia to maintain its administration order. So how do you reconcile this broad wording with this restrictive interpretation?
Your Excellency, the wording of the Treaty of Oslo in relation to the preamble and the context of the situation, where the Malakal War, as seen in the Moot problem, resulted in casualty and devastation, seems to infer that this treaty is to prevent further casualty. The 15 civilians that died as a result of Operation Valsor is in direct contrast to the context. And that is the reason why Council is reading in a restrictive light. Furthermore,
So you did not mention Article 31.3c of the VCOT, which requires taking into account relevant rules of international law applicable in relation to the parties. So is there any other relevant rules of international applicable between parties that we should take into account?
Yes, and Council will emphasize that in further argument. For example, attribution as well as necessity and proportionality, that has to be satisfied to prove the legality of certain self-defense by states. Continuing with Council's argument, accordingly, Rotia also violated Article 7.2, which limits Rotia's powers in the Malakal Tract to administrative powers. By destroying a military operation, as Council has proved before, it falls outside the scope, and as a result, Article 7.2 is violated. Finally, Article 7.3 requires Rotia to respect the rights and interests of the civilian population, including the Moot people, and to preserve peaceful character of the tract. Instead, Operation Valsor failed to ensure that the strike was limited to the alleged target. It killed 15
So wording again, the beginning of that sentence is in exercising its authority, administrative authority. So is that applicable to sort of attack military operations?
No, Your Excellency. The Council believes that the purpose of this treaty was to ensure peace in the tract and to ensure that, if anything, unnecessary military actions would not be used, and to prevent Rotia to use unnecessary military action. Council interprets administrative order as providing basic necessities and local law enforcement in the Malakal Tract to preserve its peace, not military.
So as a matter of law, how do we determine necessity for the purposes of this Oslo Treaty?
Necessity in relation to this Treaty of Oslo does have some overlap. Council believes that in order to satisfy the preamble and the purpose of the Treaty of Oslo, any military force or violence, which should be a last resort, needs to satisfy necessity. And that is the entire purpose of this treaty, to ensure that any military action taken by Rotia is a last resort, and for them to use less harmful alternative means first. Continuing with Council's argument, furthermore, Rotia failed to calculate the force of the strike that destroyed sections of the Amit Expressway. As seen in Fact 9, this infrastructure was vital for the residents in the tract as it enabled access to the new airport, a crucial economic transportation route. The destruction of essential infrastructure and loss of civilian life shows a complete disregard for civilian rights and human dignity, in violation of Article 7.3. Continuing to the second argument, Rotia cannot invoke Article 51 to justify the damages from Operation Valsor. Under the UN Charter, force mentioned in Article 2.4 is lawful.
Sorry, I think we need to understand the relationship between the UN Charter and this peace treaty before you continue explaining about the UN Charter contents.
Your Excellency, the arguments that Council is making here between the UN Charter and the Treaty of Oslo is separate, because the Treaty of Oslo is a lot more specific. For example, only maintaining administrative order and exception to the exception to the demilitarization. However, the UN Charter is, the Treaty of Oslo is a agreed upon treaty between two states. However, the UN Charter is a agreed upon is a agreed upon charter between states and international obligations.
Are you
it's more-
saying that this treaty, this peace treaty is the special law, while UN Charter is a general one? Is that what you're saying?
Council would not say special law, but it is a different argument, and it would be on the same, because the international law, the International Court of Justice does not have a hierarchy of law. It would be on the same level as the UN Charter, but the Treaty of Oslo is simply just more specific.
But there are some elements in UN Charter that overlap, that are overlapped with this peace treaty, right?
Yes, sir.
So how should we understand those elements?
Those elements are under the interpretation, according to the VCLT, Article 31, of the preamble and the context between two parties. However, the UN Charter is a strictly legally agreed upon charter between countries and international obligations. So the Treaty of Oslo needs to be taken in light of context as well.
Okay, so why doesn't you integrate that into your first argument when you explain Article 7?
Because, Your Excellency, Council believes that violation of the Treaty of Oslo or the UN Charter doesn't automatically mean, just because I state it violates.
That is exactly what we want to know, right? How, like, what aspect of the story that is different between the two applications or two treaties?
The difference is that the Treaty of Oslo has a history behind it, and that needs to be taken in light of the interpretation when interpreting the different articles. However, the UN Charter is a lot more broad and is a lot more flexible that allows for different states to further then make agreements between each other. Continuing with Council's argument, the Article 2.4 is lawful only if authorized by the Security Council when reported on or exercised in self-defense under Article 51 in response to an armed attack by another state. In this case, since the force is carried out by a non-state actor, international law requires.
So the UN Charter also, the UN Charter
The UN Charter.
also allows, the UN Charter also allows regional arrangement as well.
That is correct, Your Excellency. But the violation would be separate to the UN Charter. Just because one is violated doesn't mean the other is as well.
Okay, I understand that our power to adjudicate this case come from the peace treaty. So how UN Charter is related here from the jurisdictional perspective?
Because, Your Excellency, as Council will elaborate more in their argument, Council, the Rotia has specifically claimed that the use of force was by Amaranth. And by that logic, and under the international law, it requires an attribution to the state. And as a result, because it's between the state and the state, the UN Charter is applicable.
Right, but you just said before that we have to think about UN Charter and this treaty as a separate matter, separate application, right? And you're now relying on the jurisdictional clause in this peace treaty. And that doesn't say anything about UN Charter.
No, it said the opposite actually, right? So Article 45, if you look at the Oslo Treaty, it said in the event of alleged violation of the Oslo Treaty, or dispute about interpretation application of the articles in the Oslo Treaty. So our power is limited to interpretation and application of the Oslo Treaty, not the UN Charter.
Well, under the under the ICJ statute, if there is a dispute between a state and a state, then the UN Charter does kick in. And in this case, it is Article 2.4, where it is a use of force, where a use of force is being claimed by Rotia from Amaranth. Continuing with Council's argument, Article 3G of the UN General Assembly Resolution 3314 has recognized that sending by or on behalf of a state of non-state actors constitute an act of aggression. The Nicaragua v. the United States judgment in Article 8 of the IOC Articles on State Responsibility requires evidence of a state's effective control over a non-state actor for the state to be attributable to their acts. The Nicaragua case sets a limited scope where attribution can only be proven if the state, in this case is Amaranth, has the ability and exercise the ability to have effective control over individual non-state actors, which in this case is the FBI. However, Amaranth falls well below this threshold. as AMRAF only provided support, which will be elaborated more on my second council, like defensive training, not offensive, and uniforms. This does not by itself prove that AMRAF has effective control over FBM. Regardless, AMRAF only gave support to the Labu people, not the FBM as an organization. And the FBM only emerged 3 years after the beginning of the RISP program.
So your argument is based on the interpretation that self-defense can only exercise against non-state parties?
Not under the UN Charter, Your Excellency. Can Council have an additional 1 minute to conclude?
Yes.
Not under the UN Charter, Your Excellency, because under the UN Charter, it would require there to be a use of force from a state to another state. So self-defense under Article 51 would not be able to be.
Is it possible for the respondent to rely on other law than the UN Charter,
Council may not assist.
like customary law?
They could rely on it, but it is not in the UN Charter.
If I may go back to the language of the Charter itself. So you refer to Article 51, right? But the 51 requires an armed attack to occur, but it doesn't specify it has to be an armed attack by a state. So how do you read into that text the word state?
Because Article 51 is an exception in Article 2.4. In Article 2.4, it does mention that it has to be between 2 states.
It doesn't say that. It says in international relations.
But if the conduct is deployed by a non-state actor, according to the Nicaragua and the Congo v. Uganda case, it has to